Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm Jim Wendorf, Executive Director of the National Center for Learning Disabilities, and you've joined our Student Voices webinar. Thank you for doing so. I'm pleased to share with you today not only the results of the study that we've conducted, but also some distinguished colleagues who were instrumental in supervising and conducting the research study that we are presenting to you this morning. I'd like to introduce Stacy Parker Fisher, who is Director of the Learning Differences Program at the Oak Foundation, and Stacy is based in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I will ask her to introduce herself, tell us a little bit more. Stacy.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. Just to give you some background information on Oak Foundation, it's a family foundation that's headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. Oak has a broad international focus, which includes grant making in the areas of child abuse, environment, housing and homelessness, and international human rights. The Learning Differences program is their newest program. Oak has guiding principles in their work about partnerships with beneficiaries in the planning of the work they do, in the programs that they fund, and in evaluation of the work. This was something that was critical in developing this important partnership with NCLD and the Poses Family Foundation and moving this work forward. Our target population for our program is the 20% of students who struggle in public school settings as a result of how they process information. The goal of the Learning Difference program is to empower students with learning differences to be agents of their own learning success and to increase the number of educators and environments that expect, embrace, and respond to diverse learner profiles. Thank you for including me today.
Good. Thank you, Stacy. I'd like to introduce next Dr. Marshall Raskin, a distinguished researcher in learning disabilities. Marshall, tell us more, please.
Thanks for having me today. Jim, and welcome to everybody to this webinar. I'm a researcher in the area of learning disabilities with a particular interest in the outcomes of individuals with learning disabilities and also the factors and the attributes that may lead to ultimately positive life outcomes. I also have an interest in technology and how that can be used to help enhance the lives of persons with learning disabilities, and most recently, a focus on social media and the use of that to help individuals with learning disabilities and attention problems.
Great. Thank you, Marshall. Joining us also is Erica Anthony. Erica is a market researcher and worked closely with the Poses Family Foundation, NCLD, and many other groups to do the seminal research with parents that led to the creation of Understood.org. So, Erica, tell us more.
Good morning. Thank you, Jim. I'm Erica Anthony. I'm really pleased to be with everyone today. I come from the consumer marketing research side of things with 20 plus years experience doing marketing research from a business point of view. And I was really pleased to be able to join this team on this really unique piece of research where we look at young adults and we think of them as consumers with needs and how can we best serve them and for transition success. So that's what I was able to bring to the team, and I look forward to sharing that with you today.
Good. Thank you, Erica, and thank you all. You can see the group here. We're missing a key person on our team, and that's Sheldon Horowitz, who is away due to family illness. Let me start out and talking about the importance of student voices. We took student voices to heart. We took it literally. We needed to listen. NCLD was charged with listening, with gathering information, talking to young people with learning and attention issues, and identifying the kinds of opportunities that not just we at NCLD should pay attention to, but we hope others in the field. Why NCLD? Well, our mission is to improve outcomes, improve the lives of young people with learning and attention issues. And we know that one of the key areas of focus that needs to be looked at more carefully is certainly the area of transition. Young people moving from through high school and beyond, whether it's into post-secondary college opportunities, community college, four-year college, into career, into military. We need to do more, and we need to understand more. So I think some of the results that we're going to present today may surprise you. They surprised us. Some of what you will hear may not surprise you. They simply underscore some of the seminal research that's already been done by Marshall Raskind and other colleagues in the field. So we're excited about presenting all of this to you. I'd like to ask Stacy to tell us about how we think this knowledge will influence next steps for us in the field.
Thank you, Jim. Just to build some on Jim's introduction to this, I want to also elaborate a bit on why this was important to the Oak Foundation. This was a key partnership with NCLD for several reasons. By hearing directly from students who had navigated the public school system through 12th grade and were now looking back on their experiences, it allowed us to question our own assumptions about what makes a difference for students with learning differences. It either validates the approaches that we most espouse or brings them into question and reconsideration. And because the study looked at comparison groups, it could help us to ascertain the degree of impact on a student of having a learning difference, as Jim noted, either identified or unidentified. And as you will see, this impact was substantiated in powerful and concerning ways. We were also seeking data to better understand the experience of a student with an unidentified learning or attention issue. And this study validated that we need to be as concerned about those students with unidentified learning differences as those with diagnosed learning disabilities, which then confirms this need to focus on the 20% of the public school population. So it was our hope that what was learned from this process would have the power to impact how public schools provide instruction for students with learning differences and those with an unidentified learning difference, including instructional approaches and support services for teens as they transition to post-secondary settings. We also hoped it would impact our understanding of the role of peer relationships and mentors in the lives of students with learning and attention issues. As we learned, it's critical. And how to best serve those students, where they spend their educational time. And that is in the general education classroom. This tells us how critical it is for teachers to be prepared to meet the needs of diverse learners and how policy needs to address professional development for all teachers to support their ability to respond to those learning needs. Parents and teachers care deeply about supporting their child or student succeed, but our efforts can be misguided or misdirected. We hope to learn from students themselves how to directly engage to support them. And what are the impacts of perceptions of others on a student who can't spell well or read fluently because of their learning differences? We wanted to understand the significance of these perceptions on the outcomes for those students. And as a foundation, we sought to learn how organizations can network to share their resources, best practices, and partner to increase their impact.
Good. Thank you, Stacy. Let me turn this over at this point to Erica Anthony, and she will take us through the study design for the research. Erica?
Thank you, Jim. There you go. So the results that we're going to be talking about today come from the quantitative national study that we conducted amongst young adults. But the process really started before that, where the first thing we did was identify a council of young adults with learning and attention issues. It was very important to us from the beginning that we had young adults leading this with us, helping us understand, make sure we got language right, make sure that we were addressing the holistic student in every way. And so that board was with us throughout all aspects of the project, educating us and helping us and guiding us. From there, we went to a piece of qualitative research, which was one-on-one, in-depth studies in Paramus, New Jersey, and Denver, Colorado. These were very enlightening 1.5 hour interviews where the young adults were very willing to share their challenges, their struggles, as well as their achievements and their goals for the future. And it was tremendous fodder to go into the quantitative questionnaire that is the basis of the study we're presenting today. There were hundreds of possible questions we could have asked. We had quite a lengthy process. Marshall and so many other people from the field were important experts to help us get the questionnaire right, and from there we went into the quantitative study. Next page, please. The quantitative study was conducted amongst 1,200 young adults who had graduated from public school within the last 2 years. We felt it was important to keep that recency so that they could remember accurately their feelings, their experiences in high school, and sometimes even before high school, in middle school, when it was concrete experiences we felt they could remember. They were 15 to 25 years old because we wanted to give a broad latitude of possible ages in the last 2 years of high school, but the truth is most were 18 to 21. And while we invited a census representative panel to be part of our project, we allowed the demographics to fall as representative of the LAI community so that we were sure to be representing that community. The survey was conducted in English, and there was an option to have the entire survey, questions and answers, read aloud to the respondent during the survey. About 20% of our respondents took advantage of that. And we conducted it last August, a year ago. We did this online also very purposely because we really wanted to make sure young adults felt comfortable sharing some pretty personal information, and the online approach allowed them to feel secure and give honest feedback. One back, please, Jim. Thank you. So as Stacy already mentioned, it was very important to us from the beginning to ensure that we had a comparison group in the work. So we had about, of the 1,200 young adults, 400 of them, through a series of screening questions, expressed to us that they had no issues. They had never been formally identified. They had never even been evaluated and didn't struggle in a significant way socially or academically. And this was really important to compare and contrast to the young adults with LAI, because we know that this is a particularly trying time in life to begin with, and we wanted to ensure that we could tease out what was really LAI driven versus what was being a 19-year-old driven. From there, within the LAI community, we had both formal identified young adults represented as well as young adults who told us that they struggled significantly, either socially or academically, but had never been formally identified. And those are the two groups that Stacy spoke about. Like I said, there was a huge amount we could have asked. We were able to narrow it down to about 50 questions about their life before they transitioned out of high school, and these questions really got at the holistic experience of the young adult, from their family life and community to their education, academic performance, academic interventions, as well as attitudes about their social life, their satisfaction, their pre-transition employment, and such. Then, next slide, please, Jim. We repeated many of those questions in their post-high school experience, and this was really important because this allowed us to understand where have they landed, if you will, post-high school, which of course is not a landing in and of itself, but a step to their future, and we were able to compare and contrast. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Erica. I want to reassure everyone that the PowerPoint will be posted after this webinar is finished on ncld.org. You'll be able to find it there. Okay, let's move on to the learning. What did we learn after conducting both the qualitative, the quantitative research? What were the key points? And I will ask Marshall Raskin to take us through that. Marshall.
Thank you, Jim. As Erica stated, we collected a tremendous amount of outcome information. Again, these are the outcomes 2 years post-high school. And this information cut across areas like family, community involvement, education, employment, social relations, the attitudes, behaviors, and perceptions of this group of young adults. We then took all this information and put it basically in what we could consider a statistical hopper for analysis. We stirred it all up, and we went ahead to see what we could find. Now, before we move on to the next slide, I just want you to pay a little extra attention to those circles in purple. So just hold on to those for a second. Keep those in mind. And now we're going to move on to the next slide. What emerged was fascinating in terms of outcomes. Now, again, we're talking here about the entire group of young adults, those with learning and attention issues and those without. And what we found is that these young adults clustered into specific groups across a continuum of what could be considered negative to positive outcomes 2 years after high school. And these groups resulted primarily from their, remember those purple circles, attitudes and feelings about their current lives, rather than a lot of the other data that we saw. And you could flip back for 1 second to that previous slide, Jim. Rather than that other information that you would see in the green circles. Okay, back to the other slide again. Now, these groups could be classified or categorized into 3 primary areas: those who were termed strugglers, copers, and navigators. Now, it's important to keep in mind that while we gave them, the researchers gave them these names, this was not an arbitrary decision. This was not based on just our subjective impressions. But again, these groups clustered as a result of a statistical analysis. So essentially, what did these various groups look like? Well, on one end of the continuum, which could be considered on one level possibly less successful, what we had were the strugglers. The strugglers had very low self-confidence. They were not great decision makers. They were poor self-advocates. They often felt unsupported by the family and community. They often received negative messages from others, whether it be teachers, relatives, or peers, and they often felt socially isolated and inept. On the other end of the spectrum, these are the navigators. And the navigators were often well adapted. They were self-confident. They spoke up for themselves. They stood up for themselves. They were decisive. They felt supported by their family and community, and they were effective in navigating relationships. And in the middle, we have that group that were referred to as copers. Now, they, again, were right in the middle, and I think it's important to clarify that no matter which group you were in, it does not mean, let's take navigators for example, that you manifested every single one of these attributes to the same degree as other people who are in that group, or to say that you didn't have maybe some of the attributes that you found on the lower end. But again, you were more likely to have those particular attributes if you were in a specific group. Okay, Jem, we can go to the next slide. So now we have an overview of the individuals with learning and attention issues. Again, what you're going to see here is a representation of the strugglers, the copers, and the navigators across this entire continuum. Also, as we dug a little bit deeper, we can see that there were subgroups that emerged in this case. So one of the things that we want to get at here, and as we consider each group, that each of these groups may have very different needs and require different approaches to transition planning and support. Keeping in mind that we are not just looking at academics here, but rather at the whole person across many areas of functioning and within many settings. Again, whether it be home, the social environment, employment, looking at them personally, their attitudes, their emotions. Okay, Jim, can we move to the next slide? Now, one of the things that I want to emphasize here is that in this study, we really took more of what could be considered an ethnographic approach. We wanted to get the insider's voice. In this case, it was the voice of the young adults with learning and attention problems. So we were more concerned, rather than, quote, studying subjects, we were really trying to learn from these individuals and to understand their world and the way that they saw it. Now we have a comparison of individuals, the young adults, who both had learning and attention issues and those that did not. And again, there are learning and attention and those without attention issues in every group along this post-high school transition outcome continuum. Although the individuals with learning and attention issues do have a stronger presence among the strugglers. And needless to say, this is of concern. Let's go on to the next slide. As we look at this slide, we're looking at the differences between those individuals who had identified learning and attention issues as compared to those individuals who had, quote, unknown or unidentified learning and attention issues. And I think in looking at the continuum here and looking at some of the numbers in the continuum, that there is much more of a tendency for the individuals, the young adults with learning and attention issues, to, again, represented throughout the groups. Now, what's important to keep in mind that either having a identified learning attention issue or not having one that has been identified does not guarantee or does not necessarily push one in a particular direction or another. Now, this is not to say that it's not important to be identified early and receive services. Certainly we know from other research, let's take research in reading, that the earlier you can start a reading intervention, the more likely it is to help. But again, there's no guarantee that that early identification is going to necessarily lead someone to a particular adult income, in this case being on one side of the continuum or the other. Now, again, we're not just talking about academic success here, but we're looking at that broader concept of success and outcomes across many, many areas. Next slide, please. So far, we've just really been talking about the outcomes of this group of young adults, both those with and without learning and attention issues. But a really critical question that comes to mind is what factors or attributes or variables predict where someone may end up on that continuum? What factors, experiences, background variables, attitudes, or behaviors would actually explain where someone ends up? Now, there's not a lot of research that does that. There's definitely more research that looks at just the outcomes of individual learning and attention issues, but not ones that look at this very, very closely in terms of what actually causes or, again, predicts where someone will end up in terms of their lives. So here's what we found. We found that 82% of why an adult, a young adult with a learning disability, would end up on that continuum and end up either as a struggler, a coper, or navigator is driven by three factors. And those factors are connection to friends and community, having a supportive home life, and having self-confidence. Next slide. Now, as we look at these a little bit closer, these three factors, I just want to mention that these are not necessarily causal, but these are more correlations or associations. But we did find certain factors, and again, these are from the individuals themselves. This is from, quote, the horse's mouth, because we're looking and trying to get this insider's view. And we found a number of items, and these are actually statements made by these individuals that relate to those three major factors of what predicted specific outcomes. And so we can take a few here. My parents always made me feel that I would be successful. I had at least one parent adult who was able to help me with my learning or attention issue. I had at least one parent. They had relative ease with family issues. I felt I belonged to, looking at connection with family friends, belonged to my community. I was self-confident. I made friends easily. And as we move on to self-confidence, I was comfortable taking the first step in making new friends. I had relative ease with social relationships. Now, it's important to note here, I think, across that it was not only parents and family that were key to attaining positive adult outcomes, but that positive social and community relations were also critical. In fact, if we even look a little bit closer at self-confidence, we find that statements made by these young adults, and again, keeping in mind, we just didn't pull these out of nowhere. These had a statistical basis to them, that they illustrate the importance of social relationship. I think this becomes particularly important in light of so much research that has indicated that many individuals with learning and attention issues also have social skill deficits. So if we really want to focus in and help contribute to positive adult outcomes, it's probably very important that we, at an early age, start working on some of the social skills problems. Okay, next slide, please. There are also a number of other factors associated with young adults' success. And what we have here is young adults with learning and attention issues who had IEPs early, and also having an IEP early and having input into that IEP were more likely to thrive or have positive adult outcomes. Now, this finding is consistent with other research that shows that students who are self-determined and who advocate for themselves are more likely to achieve positive adult outcomes. We know this from research specifically in the area of learning disabilities as well as other disabilities. Anyone that's interested in that may want to look to some of the research done by Sharon Field on self-determination. Okay, next slide, please, Jim. There are actually some other factors here as well that were strongly associated with success, again, being on that right side of the continuum. And this had to do with mentoring, with teacher support, and support from others. Now, again, these were not necessarily causal or predictive, but again, associated with more positive outcomes. So, for example, we have the idea of mentoring, and this mentoring could be from a relative, it could be by a peer, it could be by somebody in the workplace, it could be from a teacher, it could be in the area of education, or it could be just in an area of interest or passion in the arts, sports, or science. We also see that support from teachers, where teachers understood their needs and understood the things that helped them were important. Getting support and help in academics, having conversations and having someone to talk to about future goals and careers was also associated with more positive outcomes. And so were activities that had to do with things outside of the academic setting and outside of schools. For example, sports, and just having the opportunity to excel at something other than academics. And we will see a number of these items both in learning disabilities research, including one of my own studies that I did with my colleagues at the Frostig Center, the 20-year study that looked at adult outcomes and found things like social support or mentors to be very predictive of positive adult outcomes. And we also find this in literature, what we call risk and resilience literature, that tries to find those behavior elements or factors that contribute to positive life outcomes in those individuals who are at risk. We find this in the work of Dr. Emmy Werner, as well as a number of other studies, again, that look at risk and the factors that contribute to positive life outcomes. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Erica, and Erica is going to talk a little bit about parents. And I also would say, Erica, please fill in wherever you think is necessary and what would help in terms of any of the other results you feel are important or anything else I already mentioned. Thank you.
Marshall. Thank you. The one thing I will add before we go on to the role of parents is that the continuum groups that Marshall presented today in the hour that we have is really very much an overview and a little bit of a teaser. For each of those groups, for those 6 groups, we have full profiles on what is the makeup of that group from all those 50 questions that I outlined earlier. And all of that is available on the NCLD website for anyone who wishes to go deeper and to take it a level down where it really becomes quite actionable. So I just wanted to mention that.
And Erica, if I could add, that's available at Student Voices at ncld.org. And also, I just want to remind those who are attending this webinar that we are taking questions. There should be some time. So please send those in. Some of you have already done so. So we'll take those up at the end of our webinar. Thank you. Go ahead, Eric.
Thank you. I'm sure we would all head nod, even without any research, that parents play a really important role in the transition success of any young adult. What we were able to do with this work is prove out some of the challenges that parents of young adults with learning and attention issues have. And through a piece of research that Jim referenced earlier, which we call the Parent Project, a similar piece of research to this Student Voices, in that we took a holistic approach at understanding the challenges, fears, dreams, achievements of a parent of a child with learning and attention issues. And from there, parents were segmented into a continuum of how were they doing with handling the issues that their child was dealing with, how were they handling the navigation through the school system, etc. And they also fall into a group, as you can imagine, it's very human nature, to struggle, be overwhelmed by all there is to do to ensure a smooth transition for your child, through being optimistic and feeling really in control. And the types of factors that helped explain how the parents were doing were things like whether they enjoyed parenting overall, whether they were overwhelmed by parenting overall. Did they have someone to share in the parenting in their household? How overwhelmed did they feel by everything that had to do with their child's learning and attention issue and the navigation through the school? On the flip side, did they have an optimistic outlook? Were they glass half full? Did they have someone to support them through the trials and tribulations of raising their child, which is universal to all parents? And so parents could be grouped into 3 groups as well. Next slide, please, Jim. We were able to bridge these 2 studies, which was really pretty exciting, because we took a subgroup of the young adults with learning and attention issues, the 1,200 students that we had in this study. We took a subgroup of them, about 400 of them, and interviewed their parents as well. And we were able to replicate, to a degree, the types of questions that were asked in the Parent Project to help segment parents so that we could tie together, bridge the degree to which a parent is able to deal with all of this and the degree to which their child might fall into one of the segments of strugglers, copers, and navigators. And what we found was really powerful. So on this slide, what you see, I'll just take a look at the optimistic column. So on the top, we have parents, whether they were struggling or optimistic in navigating the transition and really the whole academic life of their young adult. And what we found is that if you're a parent who falls into the optimistic segment, 71% of those parents are having navigator kids. So they are producing navigator kids, right? So that tells us that the more the parent feels in control and the more the parent feels supported, then the more likely it is that they will be able to help their child. And from this came understood.org and all the work and the great tools that were put together to help parents navigate this process. Next slide.
Good. Thank you, Erica. We want to move on at this point. We've presented key takeaways, certainly presented the study design, what we did, how we did it. And those takeaways that Marshall went through have already started to have an impact on our own thinking and planning at NCLD. We've had the chance to share some of these results with colleagues at other organizations. And they're starting to have impact there. So reaching all of you and through you to your colleagues is a very important next step. So some of the implications that we've identified so far. So let me kick this off, and then I'm going to turn to Stacy Parker Fisher to join me in this. Let's talk about parents. The social emotional drivers that Marshall spoke to are so incredibly important. And I can tell you, as I look back over the work of NCLD over the past 15 years, we've been very relentlessly focused on academic outcomes. Whether it's pursuing those in support of public policies or in some of the work we've done in creating screening tools and creating systematic ways to support kids in public schools. A lot of the focus has been on academic achievement. And what this study, I will tell you, tells us at NCLD is that we need to pay more attention to those social emotional drivers, those factors that clearly influence kids and influence whether they're going to thrive or whether they're going to struggle. So for parents, helping a child believe in himself or herself, to participate in activities, to really support those activities that connect children to each other and to organizations. They could be faith related, they could be athletic organizations. They're very important. What comes through is understanding one's learning and attention issues. Really a young person understanding those and being able to speak up and self-advocate. Parents, we know, have this dynamic role to play in advocating for their child. So to partner with school personnel and to be on the lookout for language, for messaging that would interfere, would undercut parents' advocacy efforts to really support their children going forward. And there's power in community, and this is one of the great offerings of understood.org, the chance to connect not only with experts, but with each other, learn from each other and support each other in supporting the social and emotional development of their children. Quickly, some implications for educators. We know that not all educators are going to take up all the specific data that this study has generated, but we do really believe that the groups of strugglers, copers, and navigators can give educators a way to better understand kids, to give them ways to really understand where children are. So promoting this understanding by using the data is something that we very much want to see educators do. We think that as important as IEPs and 504 plans are, they're critical. They should be better. But we believe that the results from this study really indicate that educators need to go beyond what's included in those programs and plans, and look at the whole child, look at really all that's going on in a child's life in order to support their development. The importance of social emotional competencies, clearly there's much more focus now on social emotional development within the world of special education. Certainly a focus on positive behavior supports. All of that, I think, is very hopeful. It needs to be scaled, and educators are there to do it. I think we will see more positive results for our children if those kinds of programs are scaled through the public schools. And as always, earlier is better. So early understanding, early diagnosis, and before frustration and failure. This has been certainly a key tenet of NCLD over the past 15 years as we've developed early identification and intervention strategies, screening tools, the promotion of RTI and MTSS, tiered systems of support. But we need to move this into schools in a much more rapid way, so that children's both strengths as well as their needs are identified and addressed. And Stacy, if I could turn to you, because the Oak Foundation, like the Posis Family Foundation, which was very helpful in providing in-kind support for this study, other foundations in our field are also making decisions about what kinds of philanthropic investments make sense, and obviously we hope that that student voices will be taken to heart and help others. Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you, Jim. And at this point, too, I want to express my appreciation to all of the parties that contributed to this work. This has been enormously helpful in informing us in the work that we're doing as a foundation. But most importantly, I think this will help us to be focused and directive in the kind of work we do that will lead to impacts for students, that will support them in better lives as they leave public school settings. So what are some of those implications for funders? I think the first piece of news is this is a lot of students. If we're talking about 20% of the public school population, this offers an opportunity that's significant and needs to be taken seriously. Certainly, continuing to have large percentages of these students leave public school settings with a lack of self-confidence, with unclear sense of what their next steps are, and with some of them with even more dire outcomes than that, as we know of the increases in the juvenile justice system as a result of students who have struggled in school. We know that this is a population that needs to be addressed. There's also risks in ignoring them, because these are students that bring important assets to both the educational setting and to society. By not paying attention to their needs and supporting them in being successful, we are ignoring an opportunity to strengthen our economy and our society going forward. We know that special education is important and continues to be important. What we can learn from this is the importance of sharing what's been learned in special education settings across all educational settings, and paying attention to all teachers in general education settings, supporting their development of skills, the provision of tools to help them in supporting students who are diverse learners. This is where these students are primarily educated, so building these bridges between special education and general education is critical. Helping students to become confident and effective self-advocates is a key to all of these outcomes. We know the metacognition research shows that those students who are able to think about themselves as learners, to develop strategies to support their own success, and implement those, are the students who are most likely to succeed. So this The ability to self-advocate and to act in agency on behalf of oneself is a critical attribute that needs to be supported through funding. If we can go to the next slide. When we look at this from a program provider point of view, so in terms of what kinds of programs need more funding or need to be further developed, it's those programs that support the understanding of these characteristics in young adults with learning and attention issues. So certainly public policy development and advocacy, as I've mentioned, some critical issues in juvenile justice as far as an overrepresentation of students with learning differences. We need pipelines to support the developments of young leaders, to continue to inform the field as well as to strengthen outcomes for those students. Mentoring has been double underlined as an important investment, and to have well-developed programs in place to make mentoring available to as many students as possible. Looking at the issues that face these students in the workplace, both in terms of policies and the kinds of cultures that are developed, is work that needs much more investment and further development. The more the public is aware of this issue, the reduction can happen in terms of the impacts of negative perceptions of students. So this is an area that Understood has made some important inroads, and further investment work needs to occur. Looking at the transition and support services in higher education, both for identified and unidentified students with learning differences, is another area where much work is beginning to occur but needs to continue to go on. And as I've mentioned earlier, the importance of teacher preparation for all teachers to support their development of skills and the provision of tools to support all students, no matter how they learn.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you. I'd like to move on and present some recommendations, and I would say these are recommendations not just that we're making to ourselves at NCLD, but we're making to others in the field and in those in decision-making capacities. One is really leveraging the access, the information, and the power of understood.org. And as Erica went through, the impact of parents on children's support and their development, we think that the more that we can do to help parents understand LAIs, to understand their children, how to foster confidence and promote feelings of optimism, we think that will have a tremendous impact on what we've seen that the research shows in developing more confident individuals who can command their own destinies, be decisive in the kinds of actions they take. We also see that we need to help students with learning and attention issues become more engaged in their school and general communities. And we think that this is largely overlooked among our young people. We think that we and other organizations and schools themselves can do much more than is now being done. And second, the strong relationships with peers. Again and again, both in this research and in so many of the conversations that we have on a daily basis with parents about their journey as parents, their children's journey as individuals with learning and attention issues, so much comes back to friendship and other kinds of relationships with peers. We need to focus on this. And so I'm saying that to NCLD itself, and I'm certainly we're recommending that other organizations and the schools pay much more attention and put in place the kinds of supports and services to develop such strong relationships. Some next steps, and then I want to go to some questions. Thank you, many of you, for already sending some in, and we'll get to those in just one moment. We're sharing the findings, and today is really the start of that. We would like you to help us do that by sharing what you've learned today, sharing the links sending people to studentvoices@ncld.org, you will be able to take a very deep dive into the data. Included at that spot on our website is not only an executive summary, but also a very helpful infographic that can take everyone very quickly through the key takeaways plus the design of the research study. In addition to that are the data sets. In working with the Oak Foundation, one of the key charges was to develop an open source data set that others can access. So other researchers, other organizations who want to delve more deeply into the questions that were asked and into the kinds of answers that were produced. So all of that is available at studentvoices@ncld.org. So I hope those of you who would like to take that deep dive will do so. Let me take a couple of questions, and I will direct these to individuals who are participating in the webinar today. The first one is, I think we'll go to Marshall. And one of our participants says, it's very hard to build confidence for a child when LD is identified in high school. How do we build confidence when the identification happens that late? So Marshall, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I think, of course, as we mentioned before, that when if you're starting earlier, and the sooner we can start addressing these issues, the better. But I don't see that if we do start later. So while it probably is best to start at an earlier age, and we know that from research, I don't think that starting later in high school precludes the fact that you still can help build self-confidence. Relative to this research, we found that positive messaging is very, very important, and that messaging coming from parents, but also from peers and from teachers and the rest of the community, and helping the student also, which I think is so key. We place so much of a focus on academics that if we start looking towards other areas, areas in which the student can succeed and excel, following their interests and their passions and their strengths, because we tend to be so deficit-oriented. So if it is a question that somebody has a great talent in art, in music, to the extent that they can participate in those activities and build confidence outside of just the academic areas, I think can go a long way in terms of building self-confidence.
Good. Thank you, Marshall. Thank you. We have a question, and Stacy, I think I'd like to have you comment on this. One of our participants says, my experience as a parent with a student with learning and attention issues, and also supporting other parents in the special education process. So my experience is that we need to target higher education to ensure that we're preparing our future teachers. And knowing what the Oak Foundation has done, specifically in higher ed, if you could address this comment and maybe what Oak itself is doing.
Certainly, thank you, Jim. This is it's a good question, and it's an area with a lot of concern, and where we've done a lot of work to look at where are some of our best leverage points. I want to share an interesting project that's going on, and then also want to share one of the strategies that we're currently using. There's a project that we're doing with the University of North Carolina system, where we're working to bring 6 of their campuses into alignment with a set of criteria that would make them welcoming to students with learning differences. So they're actually recruiting students with learning differences, supporting them through transition, retention, and to graduation. These programs are functioning very successfully, and while they're incorporating disability services, they are not exclusive to that, so that students who have not been identified with a disability are being supported through various services. But one of the things that's arisen on the campus at East Carolina University is that students in this program go into teacher preparation classes and talk to teachers who are in the process of becoming teachers, or talk to teachers in that sequence about what it was like to have a learning difference and what were the things that made a difference to them and what advice they have for teachers. This has proven to be not only have a huge impact for the teachers that are in the preparation process, but also for those students who are going into those classrooms and working with the teachers. Another program that we're involved with is the New Teacher Center. We found that in order to have an impact on teacher preparation programs all across the United States, you're looking at having to work with thousands of different programs. But if there are some of the induction programs that we could be involved with and help all teachers, no matter where they're graduating from, experience some common training and coaching and support to bring them to a place of expecting diverse learners and supporting them in classrooms, that's proven to be an effective avenue to lead to that outcome.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Stacy. A question that we've encountered many, many times, and Marshall, I'm going to call on you again to address this one. And this is as follows. How do you get high schoolers to push for assistance when they don't want to draw attention to their own learning disability? In other words, when they're not really, they're wanting not to reveal, not to disclose the fact that they have a learning disabilities. How do you get more assistance to them?
It's a great question, and I wish I had a very simple answer to that. I'm afraid I don't. I think one of the things that we found, both from this study and in other studies that have looked at adult outcomes and the factors that lead to those outcomes, is trying to help develop the self-awareness of the student. And what that involves is, again, not just focusing on the difficulties or the deficits or the limitations or the weaknesses, but helping the individual to become self-aware of their strengths, and in many cases outside of the academic areas. So again, trying to understand themselves in terms of sports and music and social relationships and emotion, and spreading it across many of these domains and areas. Another critical idea that's related to this is that they have to start believing in themselves and thinking of themselves more than just of their learning and attention issue. So they essentially need to what we call compartmentalize, and to the extent we can help them take that and have it as part of them, but not be overly defined by their particular difficulties. So again, focusing on those passions and those interests and those strengths and the things that they do well, I think can do a lot to help them in that area.
Good. Thank you, Marshall. We've come up on the end of our time. I thank you, all of you, the hundreds of people who participated today. This PowerPoint will be posted at studentvoices@ncld.org. I encourage you to go to it and share it with others. I want to thank my colleagues, Stacy Parker Fisher, Marshall Raskin, and Erica Anthony. And with special thanks to the Oak Foundation for investing in this research, and to the Poses Family Foundation for in-kind support that was so helpful in bringing the project forward. Many thanks. Have a wonderful day.